The foreigner in the pale gray coat tapped the breast of my friend's tunic with one knuckle, the way a man raps a melon to hear if it's hollow, and said to the laughing people behind him, "You see, they have kept a museum piece and stood it up by the door." I was 4 paces to the left of that knuckle, at my own post on the long marble landing of the Hall of Nations, and I will tell you exactly what went through me because I have had 11 years to be ashamed of it. What went through me was, do not, Edric. Do not move, do not look, do not give this man the gift of one flicker of your face. We are the king's guard. We are the stillness at the center of a loud room, and the loud room is always, always trying to make us into part of its noise. So I held. And beside me, taller, older, his gray eyes fixed on the middle distance over all their heads, Sergeant Halloran Vane held too, and Vane held the way a stone holds, which is to say without any sense at all that holding was a thing being done. The man in the gray coat was the leader of the Sundaran delegation, and his name, which they spoke often and loudly, was Dr. Oral Casting. The free cities of Sundar had sent him to our state exposition of crafts and mechanisms with a great deal of brass and lacquer, and a great deal of opinion. And the opinion that pleased him most was that our kingdom of Aldermere was a charming, sentimental, backward little country that polished its past instead of building its future. He had been saying it for 3 days, in the lecture hall, in the press gallery, in the gilded supper rooms. Now he was saying it to a wall of wool and brass that could not answer him, which I think is the bravest place a certain kind of man ever chooses to be brave. Consider this post, Casting went on and turned to address the crowd as if Vane were a diagram on an easel. The Aldermish call it the keeper's stand. A man stands here motionless for 2 hours. He watches the great doors of their treasury hall. He carries a rifle he has not fired in earnest in his life. He does nothing, he produces nothing, he decides nothing, he is paid to be furniture, and they are proud of him. He spread his hands. We have come to show you the future of the doorway. We have brought it in a crate. They had too. I had watched it come up the marble stairs that morning under a dust sheet, 6 Sundaran technicians sweating around it on a wheeled cradle. Now, with the showman's timing Casting clearly relished, 2 of them swept the sheet away, and the crowd made the sound crowds make for fireworks. It was, I will be honest, a beautiful thing. It stood the height of a man and a half, a tower of blued steel and polished glass, with a brass crown of lenses where a head would be, and a single articulated arm folded against its flank like the wing of some patient mechanical heron. Casting called it the Argus. He said it could watch a doorway without sleeping, without blinking, without a wage or a pension or a sentimental ballad written about it. He said it could read a man's face against 10,000 faces it had been taught and ring an alarm before a human guard had finished deciding to be worried. He said it never grew bored, never grew proud, never grew old. And so, he finished, walking back to Sergeant Vane and looking up into that still gray face with frank, smiling contempt, we propose with the greatest respect to your traditions that this gentleman be retired, gently, to a chair. He has earned a chair. The crowd laughed and a flashbulb popped, and I felt the laugh land on Vane the way a thrown drink lands, and I watched my sergeant not so much as breathe wrong. You must understand what Vane was, as the crowd saw him, for the rest of this to weigh what it weighs. They saw an old soldier. Tall, square, weathered, a deep seam of a scar running up out of his right glove and disappearing into the cuff. They saw a quiet man at the back end of a long, quiet career, propped by the door of the Treasury Hall because the service had nowhere kinder to put him. A museum piece stood up by the door. That is what they saw. That is what Casting saw, and Casting was a clever man. And being clever, he never once wondered whether the thing he was looking at might be cleverer than he was, and simply have nothing to prove. I knew different. I had known Vane 2 years, and I knew exactly 3 more things about him than the crowd did, and even 3 was more than he'd ever volunteered. I knew he never removed his right glove, even off duty. I knew that once, in a thunderstorm that rattled the barrack windows, A young trooper had asked him conversationally how to tell if a thing was safe to pick up, and Vane had answered, "You don't pick it up. You sit with it until you understand it. Most men die from hurrying," and then had not said another word for the rest of the evening. And I knew that the senior officers of the household, hard men who did not waste deference, went still when Sergeant Vane walked into a room, the way you go still in a church. I did not yet know why. That was the day I found out. Casting snapped his fingers, and the demonstration began. They had set it up the way these things are always set up, to win. 3 of his technicians took up positions among the crowd holding cards with painted faces, a wanted face, a cleared face, a watch face, and the Argus was to pick the dangerous one out of the throng and ring its bell and point its long brass arm at the threat, faster and surer than any tired old man. The lenses whirred and clicked, focusing and refocusing, a sound like a clock arguing with itself. A green lamp glowed in the machine's chest. Casting stood beside it with his hand resting on its flank, proprietary, a father at a christening. "Now," he said, "the wanted man show the card." A technician near the windows lifted the painted, wanted face above his head. The lenses swung. The bell rang one clear silver note, and the long brass arm unfolded and pointed, dead straight at the man with the card. The crowd applauded. Casting bowed. The machine, I will grant it, was very fast and very sure, and beside me I felt the room decide in that easy way rooms decide things, that the future had arrived in a crate, and the past was the tired man by the door. And then a small thing happened that the crowd did not notice, but I did, and Vane did, because noticing is the entire profession. Down in the Treasury Hall, behind the great doors Vane guarded, a different bell rang, not the bright silver one. A low, flat, urgent note, 2 strokes and a pause and 2 strokes, that I had heard exactly once before in a drill and never since. The deep vault alarm, the one that does not mean a thief in the gallery. It means the strong room. It means the deepest door in the building, the one behind 3 other doors, the one where the kingdom keeps the things it cannot replace. Vane's gray eyes moved, just that, the first thing I had seen them do in 2 hours. They moved down, and to the right, and fixed on the great closed doors at his back as if he could see straight through 6 inches of oak and iron, to whatever was making that low bell sing. And I understood, with a cold drop in my stomach, that the marvel in the middle of the floor was pointing its bright brass arm at a painted card, and the real danger was already inside the house. What happened next happened fast, and yet I remember every second of it slowed almost to stillness, the way you remember the worst moments, and the best ones, which are sometimes the same moment seen twice. A steward came out of the small door beside the great doors at a run, which a steward never does, white to the lips, and went straight to the master of the exposition, a kind, fussy man named Pell who had spent 6 months arranging flowers and place cards and was now about to discover what his post was actually for. The steward spoke into Pell's ear. I watched Pell's color go the way the steward's had gone. He looked at the great doors. He looked at the laughing crowd around the gleaming machine. He looked helplessly at the one fixed point in the room, which was my sergeant. And Sergeant Vane was already a different man. He had not moved his feet. He had not raised his voice. He had not made any sound at all. But the stillness had changed its nature entirely. Until that moment, his stillness had been the stillness of a man at rest in his discipline. Now it was the stillness of a hunting thing the half-second before it moves. Every line of him gathered and aimed, and I felt the air around him tighten like a drawn cord. Pell hurried over, wringing his soft hands. "Sergeant, there is the lower gallery, the works gallery, where the exhibits are charged and run. There has been a man has, he could not get it out. He tried again. One of the exhibitors, the man with the boring engine, the deproc cutter, he has taken it down into the service passage. He says he is saying he will set it to running and walk away, that it will bore through the strong room wall in 20 minutes, and he wants money. He wants, Sergeant. He has the charges from his own machine. He has cutting charges, and he is sitting with them in the passage, and he will not let anyone near. And if anyone rushes him, he says he will set them off where he sits, under the main hall, under all of us. I heard the word charges, and I felt my own training go cold and useless in my hands. We are trained for men. We are trained for the shove and the spit and the drawn knife and the rush at the gate. We are not, most of us, trained for a desperate man sitting in the dark with the makings of a collapse under a hall full of 2,000 people. And here is the thing I will carry to my own grave. The crowd around the Argus had not stopped. The machine's bell had rung its bright silver note. Casting was midway through his triumphant patter, and not 3 feet from a man quietly telling my sergeant that there were live charges under the floor, Dr. Oral Casting was saying. And unlike your sentimental relic, the Argus does not panic. The Argus does not freeze. And the crowd was laughing, and the flashbulbs were popping, and the Marvel stood in the middle of it, all turning its bright lenses on a painted card. Pell, drowning, did the only thing his frightened mind could think to do. He turned to Casting, to the loud, confident foreigner who had spent 3 days promising that his machine was better than our men at exactly this, and he said in a voice that cracked, "Doctor, doctor, please, your machine. You said it can find a dangerous man and ring before a human could. There is a dangerous man in the service passage this instant. Use it. For the love of heaven, use it now." I have to give Casting this much. For 1/2 of 1 second the contempt fell off his face, and underneath it I saw a clever man do a fast, an honest sum, and arrive at a frightening total. Then the showman climbed back over the man, because the crowd was watching, and the press was watching, and 3 days of speeches were watching, and he could not now say in front of all of them that the marvel was a trick that found painted cards in good light and nothing else. "Of course," he said, "of course. Stand back, all of you, stand well back. You are about to see why your guardsmen are obsolete." And he had 2 of his technicians wheel the Argus to the small door, and he bent over its controls, and he sent his future down the stairs into the dark. We could not see it work. We could only hear it through the open door and read it on the faces of the technicians who crowded the top of the stairs with their hand lamps, the lenses whirring, the clock arguing with itself. And then nothing useful, a long, terrible nothing. I learned afterward exactly why it failed, and it is worth your knowing because it is the whole heart of this. The Argus could not see in the dark. It had been built for a bright gallery, for daylight on 10,000 catalogued faces, and the service passage was a black gut of brick lit by 1 swinging lamp. Its lenses hunted and found nothing they had been taught, and the man down there was not a catalogued face. He was a stranger in shadow, sitting still. The machine had been built to recognize. It had never been built to understand. It rang no bell. It pointed its bright arm at the wall, at a coil of cable, at nothing, and then a technician on the stairs gave a low cry, because the man in the passage, frightened by the whirring thing rolling at him out of the dark, this blind, clattering tower with a lamp for an eye, had begun, they could hear it, to fumble at the charges. The very thing they had feared. The marvel had not found the danger. The marvel had startled it. Casting straightened up from the controls, and for the first time in 3 days the loud man had nothing to say. His mouth opened and shut. The green lamp on the Argus's chest, far below in the dark, glowed on uselessly, a steady idiot eye. And in that silence, into the gap the marvel had torn open and could not fill, Sergeant Halloran Vane spoke. The first words I had ever heard him say on post. "Move the people back from the center of the hall," he said. His voice was low and even, and it went through the room like a hand laid flat on a bolting horse. "Not toward the doors, to the walls, quietly. Mr. Pell, you will tell them there is a small fault with the heating and we are airing the hall. You will not run. If you run, they run." He was already pulling at the fingers of his right glove. "Edric." "Sergeant." "Hold this post. Whatever comes up those stairs, you hold this post. The strong room is at your back and it is yours now." He drew the glove off. I looked at his bared right hand, and I understood the first of the three things I had never understood. The scar I had glimpsed at his cuff did not end at his wrist. It ran the length of the back of his hand, old and silver and deep, and it had taken with it the last joint of 2 fingers, neatly, long ago, the way only one kind of work takes fingers, the work of a man who handles the things that take fingers from those who hurry. The work of a man who sits with a dangerous thing until he understands it. Most men die from hurrying. He had said that in a thunderstorm, and I had thought it a piece of an old man's gloom, and it was not. It was the first commandment of his trade. "You'll need light," I said, because I could think of nothing else to say to a man walking toward charges in the dark. "No," said Vane. "I'll need quiet." And he turned and went to the small door, and the technicians at the top of the stairs scattered out of his path without being told, the way the officers went still when he entered a room, and Sergeant Halloran Vane went down into the dark after the thing the marvel could not do. I want to tell you about that descent the way it deserves, and I cannot, because I was not in it. I was holding the post he gave me, my back to the great doors of the strong room, watching a hall of 2,000 people be quietly walked to the walls by a sweating flower arranger who had found, in the worst hour of his fussy life, a thread of iron in himself he had never been asked for before. But I know what happened below, because the technicians on the stairs saw it by lamplight and told it after, and because Vane, in his way, told me the rest of it years later, when I had earned the hearing of it. He did not rush the man. The marvel had rushed the man, and the rushing had nearly killed everyone in the building. Vane did the opposite of the marvel in every way, and that, I have come to believe, is the entire lesson of the day. The thing casting built a tower of glass to avoid and never learned. The machine had been built to be fast. Vane knew that fast was the enemy. The machine had been built to recognize a danger. Vane knew you do not master a danger by recognizing it. You master it by understanding the frightened human being who is holding it. The machine had 1,000 faces in its memory, and not one of them was a soul. Vane had no memory of this man at all and went down to learn his soul in the dark, one quiet word at a time. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, well back in the swing of the one lamp, where the man could see his empty hands and his bare scarred hand most of all. He set the rifle down on the bottom step, deliberately in plain sight, and stepped away from it. And he sat down on the cold brick floor of the passage, an old man with bad knees folding himself down to the level of the desperate one, and he said, the technicians heard it, low and even, "I've handled what you're holding, longer than you've been alive. I'm not here to take it off you. I'm here so you don't have to be the only one in the world who knows how frightened you are." The man in the dark said something none of them could hear. "I know," said Vane. "I know, tell me your name." And in the great hall above, with my back to the strong room and a hall full of people I was suddenly the last line between, I learned the second thing. It came from the most unlikely mouth in the building. An old gentleman in the crowd, a thin, upright old man in a plain dark coat that had clearly once been a uniform, who had been standing near the Argus through the whole demonstration with an expression I had taken for ordinary curiosity, pushed forward to the small door where Casting stood ruined and silent over his useless machine. He took Casting by the elbow, not unkindly, the way you steady a man who has had a shock. "Doctor," the old man said, and his voice carried in the hush, "do you know who that is? The man you have spent 3 days calling furniture, the man who has just gone down those stairs?" Casting did not answer. I'm not sure he could. "That is Halloran Vane," the old man said. "There is no reason you would know the name. It was never in your newspapers, it was never in ours, but I will tell you because I think you have earned the bill." He drew a slow breath. 26 years ago, when the old powder magazine under the river works took fire, you will not have heard of it. It was a small kingdom's small disaster, 100 families on the bank, and a fire walking toward enough black powder to take the whole quarter into the sky. The engineers said it could not be reached and could not be stopped, and the quarter should be given up. One man disagreed. One young sapper of the Royal Engineers went in under the burning floor with a knife and a coil of slow match in his bare hands, and he found the fire's road, and he cut it, and he sat in the dark beside the live magazine for 4 hours, alone, easing the charges cold one at a time while the building groaned over his head, because there was no one else who could and no time to teach one. He came out at dawn missing 2 finger ends, and he has never spoken of it. They wanted to give him the highest thing the kingdom gives. He asked them, instead, to give the pensions to the families and let him be left alone. The old man's eyes were wet and steady. He was the finest combat engineer this kingdom ever made, doctor. The men in this service who go quiet when he passes, that is why. And when his hands could no longer be trusted to be quick, he did not take the chair they offered him. He asked for a post by a door, where he could stand his watch over the things that should not pass, in a country he had already gone into the fire to save once, and asked nothing back. The old man let go of Casting's elbow. You called him a man who decides nothing. He is the only man in this hall who has ever decided anything that mattered. And he has just gone down those stairs to decide it again, for you, and for all these strangers, and for the painted card you taught your toy to find. The crowd had gone utterly silent. Even the flashbulbs had stopped. And from the dark below the floor, faint, came Sergeant Vane's even voice, still talking, still low, still patient, not commanding, not pleading, just there. The one steady human sound in the worst place in the building, sitting with a frightened man until the frightened man could understand that he was not alone. The technicians at the top of the stairs told the rest of it after, in low voices, the way men tell a thing they cannot quite believe they witnessed, and I have put their pieces together 100 times in the years since. The man's name, it turned out, was Laverick. He had built the boring engine over 6 years, mortgaged his house for the castings, brought it across the water to our exposition cert it would make his name and his fortune, and watched the great loud delegation from his own free cities sweep past his little stall without a glance, on their way to praise a tower of glass that did nothing his honest engine could not do better. Casting himself had walked by the boring engine that first morning, glanced at the maker's worn coat, and said to his companions a single word, provincial, and walked on. By the 3rd day, Laverick had a ruined business, a debt that would take his house, a sick wife at home across the sea, and a head full of the kind of dark arithmetic that visits a desperate man at 3 in the morning and dresses itself up as the only door left. The strong room behind the great doors held the kingdom's gold reserve. He had told himself he would not hurt anyone, that he would only threaten, only frighten, only take enough to climb back out of the pit. Men tell themselves a great many things at the bottom of the pit. The charges in his hands did not care what he had told himself. Vane, sitting on the cold brick at the bottom of the stairs, did not argue him out of any of it. That was the thing the technicians could not get over. He did not say it was wrong, or that he would be caught, or that he would hang. He asked about the engine. He asked in that low, even voice how Laverick had solved the cooling on the cutting head, because Vane had seen the stall and the engine was, he said, a genuinely fine piece of work, the work of a real maker, and the kind of mind that could build that head was not the kind of mind that wanted to bring a hall full of strangers down on top of itself. He asked about the sick wife. He let the man weep. And when at last he laid his bare scarred hand out flat on the brick, palm up between them, and said, "The nearest technician swore to it, give them to me one at a time, son. I've held worse than these, and my hands are old, but they still know the way. We'll set them cold together, and then we'll go up the stairs, and I will stand beside you the whole way, and not one man in that hall will lay a rough hand on you while I am there to see it." When he said that, the man Laverick, who had brought a kingdom to the edge of catastrophe, began to hand him the charges, one at a time, into the steady, scarred hand of the only person in the building who had bothered to ask his name. I will not pretend the next quarter of an hour was anything but the longest of my life. I stood my post with my back to the strong room doors and the whole hushed weight of the hall pressing against me, and I learned, in real time, The exact thing Vane had been teaching by example for 2 years without a single word. That the hardest and most necessary thing a guardsman ever does is not to act, but to hold the line he has been given while another man does the dangerous thing, and to trust that his stillness is itself a kind of protection. That a hall of frightened people, glancing again and again at the one figure who has not moved, takes from that figure the permission not to panic. Twice the crowd's quiet began to fray, a ripple of fear running along the walls, and twice I did nothing but stand square and look at nothing and let them see a man who was not afraid, and twice the ripple died against me. I had thought for 2 years that the post was the easy part of the work. I learned that day that the post is the work. From below, the lamplight on the stairwell wall shifted and steadied. Vane's voice went on, too low now to make out words, only the even music of it, the rise and fall a man uses on a spooked animal or a sleepless infant or a soul at the end of its rope. Once it stopped, and the silence was so total I heard the green lamp of the Argus humming far down in the dark, and I felt the whole hall stop breathing with me. Then it began again, lower still, and I understood without being able to say how that the worst point had passed, that somewhere down there in the brick and the swinging light an old man with 2 finger ends gone had reached the frightened one and was now, very slowly, with the patience of a man easing charges cold in a burning magazine, taking the danger apart. It was not the rifle that did it. The rifle was still lying on the bottom step where Vane had left it, untouched, the whole time. It was not force. Castaing's marvel had brought force and lenses and 1,000 catalogued faces into that passage, and it had nearly killed us all. What went down those stairs and saved the building was a man who knew the thing in the dark, both the steel and the soul of it, better than the man holding it knew it himself, and who was willing to sit at the level of another man's terror and stay there until the terror let go. When at last the technicians on the stairs began, very carefully, to go down, not rushing, never rushing, because Vane's flat hand came back up out of the dark to slow them, I knew it was done. They went down with their lamps and their wire and their careful steps, and they came back up bearing between them, with the tenderness men show to a thing that could still kill them, a flat case of the cutting charges, drawn, safed, and laid out as neat as a surgeon's tray. And behind them came 2 more, half carrying, half walking, a thin shaking exhibitor with a soot-streaked face, and eyes wide as a man waking from a nightmare into a worse one. The boring engineer, the man who had carried a ruined business and a debt he could not bear and a black notion down into the dark, and who was now weeping openly, the loose, helpless weeping of a man who had meant to do an unforgivable thing and been stopped, in the only way that ever truly stops such a man, by being understood before he was condemned. And last of all, in no hurry at all, up the worn stone stairs and back into the light of the Hall of Nations, came Sergeant Halloran Vane. He looked exactly as he always looked. That was the thing that undid me, I think, more than anything else that long day. He came up out of 400 breaths of mortal danger with brick dust on his knees and his bare scarred hand hanging easy at his side, and his gray face had no triumph in it and no fear and no story to tell. He had done a thing 26 years ago that a kingdom wanted to crown, and asked instead to be left alone. He had just done it again in front of 2,000 people and a wall of pressmen, and he plainly wanted nothing from any of them either. He crossed to the bottom step, picked up his rifle, checked it with 2 unhurried motions, and only then did he turn and look for me, the way you look to be sure the post you handed off is still well kept. I was standing it. I caught his eye and I gave him the smallest nod a man can give, and the corner of his mouth moved. Once, not a smile. Vane did not smile, but the place where a smile would be in a man who allowed himself such things. And he came back across the marble to take up his glove and his stand and be, once more, the still point at the door. But the room would not let him be furniture again. The room had seen. Dr. Oral Casting stood beside his beautiful useless tower with the wreck of 3 days on his face, and I watched a clever man do the bravest thing I ever saw a proud man do, which is not to flee a humiliation but to walk straight into it. He could have slipped out. The crowd's attention was all on Vane. No one would have stopped him. In another country, on another day, I think he would have. But the old man in the once uniform had said a thing to him that had got past the showman and reached whatever was underneath, and so Dr. Casting did not slip out. He walked across the open marble floor, alone, past his own technicians who would not meet his eye, and he stopped in front of Sergeant Vane, and in front of the pressman and the 2000 and his own ruined invention, he took off his pale gray hat. "Sergeant," he said, his voice was not steady, 3 days I have called you furniture. An hour ago I rapped your chest with my knuckle and called you a museum piece, stood up by the door." He swallowed. "I built a machine to do your work. I was very proud of it. It can recognize 10,000 faces in good light and ring a bell faster than any man alive." He looked, just once, at the dark doorway and the stairs going down. And when a frightened man sat in the dark with the lives of everyone in this hall in his shaking hands, my machine rolled up to him blind and clattering and very nearly killed us all, because I had taught it to recognize a danger, and I had never thought to teach it to understand a man. There is no teaching it that. I see now there is no teaching it that. That is not a thing you build. That is a thing you become over a lifetime by going into the fire and not asking to be thanked. He put his hand out. "I am ashamed. I would be honored if you would take my hand." And here is the third thing I learned about Sergeant Halloran Vane, and it is the one I have tried hardest to be worthy of in the 11 years since. He did not take the hand to win. He did not take it to be gracious in victory, or to seal his triumph in front of the cameras, or to make the proud man's humbling complete. A lesser man, a man like me, on a worse day, would have left that hand hanging just 1 second too long to let the room enjoy it. Vane did not have a vain bone in his body, and he did not have a cruel one either. He looked at Casting for a moment with those level gray eyes, and what was in them was not contempt and was not triumph. It was something closer to fellow feeling, the recognition one maker gives another. "You build well, Doctor," Vane said quietly, and took the offered hand in his bare scarred one. "Better than I ever could. I cannot make a thing that watches a doorway without sleeping. You can, and one day it will save lives I'll never live to see." His grip tightened, friendly. "But a doorway is not the danger. The man is the danger, and the man is also the only thing worth saving, and you cannot save a man you have not troubled to understand. Build me a machine that can sit down on a cold floor beside the worst hour of a stranger's life, and I will retire to your chair gladly and thank you and mean it." He let the hand go. "Until then, I think there is room in the doorway for both of us, your eyes that never sleep, and a man who can come down the stairs. I have seen many things turn a crowd, in 11 years of standing in front of crowds. I have never seen anything turn one like that." There was no cheer. It was past cheering. It was the kind of moment a cheer would have cheapened. But I felt the whole hall let out a long breath together, 2,000 people releasing the same held thing at once, and somewhere near the back, a single pair of hands began to clap, slow and hard, and the old man in the once uniform took it up. And then it ran through the room like fire through dry grass, and the Hall of Nations stood and roared for the museum piece by the door. Vane did not bow. He did not so much as nod. He drew his glove back on over the silver scar, settled the rifle into the crook of his arm and faced front, eyes forward at his post, still as stone, and the cheering broke against that stillness and washed up around it and could not move it. And that, I think, was the last and best lesson of the whole long day. That the man who had just been shown to be the most extraordinary soul in the building wanted, more than any honor they could heap on him, simply to be allowed to go on being the still point at the door. The honor he wanted was the work. They took the boring engineer away that night, but not the way they take a thief. Vane spoke for him, quietly, to the right people, the way he did everything. And what he said I learned only in pieces, but the shape of it was this. that a ruined man who has been stopped before he could do the unforgivable, and who broke down weeping the moment another human being treated him as a man and not a monster, is not the same as a man who would have done it gladly, and the kingdom is judged by what it does with the difference. He was given care instead of a cell, and the last I heard he was alive, and mending in a quiet place by the sea, and had written a letter once a year, every year, to a sergeant who never answered them but kept every one. The Sundaran delegation went home a week later, and the newspapers of the free cities, I am told, did not print one word of the Argus or the demonstration in the Hall of Nations, which is the surest proof I know that something true happened there, because the things that change a proud man are exactly the things he cannot bring himself to print. But Dr. Casting wrote, too. He wrote to the household, a long letter, and there was a line in it that the old man in the once uniform read aloud to a few of us one evening in the guardroom, and I have it by heart. "I came to your kingdom," Casting wrote, "to show you the future of the doorway, and an old man you keep by a door showed me that I had built a marvel that could see everything and understand nothing, and that this is the most dangerous thing a man can build, and that I had very nearly become it myself. I am older now than Vane was that day. The gray is in my own hair, and the officers have lately begun, I notice, to go a little quiet when I pass, though I have done nothing in my life to compare with what that man did in a burning magazine before I was born. Sergeant Halloran Vane is gone these 3 years. He died as he lived, quietly in his sleep, asking nothing, and we buried him with the plain stone he would have wanted, and the full honors he would have refused if he could. I stood his post the day of the funeral, because someone had to, and because there was nowhere in the world I would rather have stood. And I have thought 10,000 times about the marvel and the man, about the tower of blued steel that could recognize 10,000 faces and ring a bell faster than any man alive, and the old sapper with 2 finger ends gone who could not be made fast again and did not need to be. The machine was built to be quick, and to see, and to never grow old. Vane was none of those things. Vane was slow, and patient, and tired, and worn down to a scar and a stillness. And when the worst hour came and the marvel rolled up to it blind and clattering and made it worse, it was the slow, tired, worn-out man who went down the stairs into the dark and sat on the cold floor at the level of another man's terror and understood him and saved us all. They called him a museum piece stood up by the door. They were right that he was a thing the kingdom had decided not to lose. They were wrong about everything else. The marvel could find the danger. Only the man could come down the stairs.